So when the MacBook Neo came out a couple months ago, everybody looked at the current space of Windows laptops and they sort of laughed, right? Because they were saying the laptops that aligned with the Neo made some massive sacrifices in everything from like build quality to the keyboard to the connectivity, basically everything else. They were laptops that you did not want. But now things are changing because this is the new XPS 13. And yes, Dell is figuring that their XPS lineup can compete with the MacBook Neo, not only on build quality and everything else where those other Windows laptops were lacking, but also on the price. And let's be honest here, right? The XPS series is not where we expected a competitor to the Neo to ever come from, right? Because this is Dell's premium lineup. But they have also made a few sacrifices here to the XPS 13 that you need to know about when it's launched a little bit later this month. And just to be clear, this video isn't sponsored by Dell in any way. They gave us early access to the XPS 13 and that's it. Anyways, let's start from the top. Dell's absolutely not moving away from the XPS heritage of top-level build quality, with this thing being fully made of CNC'd aluminum. So the same as what's made the Neo a cut above everything else at this price point. And guys, I cannot emphasize this enough. The overall feel of the XPS 13, this is the first thing that anybody will look at when comparing this directly to the Neo in a retail environment, right? It is just a cut above. No, it's not even a cut above. It is just on a whole other level compared to everything else that's currently available in the Windows space. I'd actually compare it against like $1,000 devices or even laptops that are going for double that. And this thing barely hits $700. It's also the thinnest XPS ever at just 12.7 millimeters. So the same as the MacBook Neo, although it does have a bit smaller footprint and weighs about 18% less. And look, it's really hard to describe how crazy light it feels. You need to experience this to believe it, because not only is it light, the build quality makes it feel completely stable in your hands. Another thing you'll need to experience is the screen. Forget about the dim, low refresh rate panels with horrible viewing angles you normally find at this price point on Windows laptops. Instead, the one used on the XPS 13 is something that rivals and in some critical ways just slaps the Neo around by offering a variable refresh rate of up to 120 Hz, 100% coverage of the DCI P3 color space, touch support, and an anti-glare coating. And the keyboard experience, look, I have not had a ton of time with the Neo, maybe like an hour or two, but I can confidently say that what Dell is offering here on the XPS 13 is quite a bit better typing experience. Not only that, you get the one feature that everybody wishes that the Neo actually had, and that is a keyboard backlight. Meanwhile, they both have precision glass touchpads with actual buttons rather than haptic feedback. On the connectivity front, well, Dell also has a lead here with a pair of USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type-C ports, whereas the Neo's second port runs at just 480 megabytes per second. Dell's also going to have a version with 2 Thunderbolt 4 ports if you choose an upgraded CPU. Another thing that I wish that Dell included on a laptop in this price point, or any price point for that matter, is a simple 3.5mm headphone jack. It's completely MIA on this thing, whereas the Neo does have it. And with so many people going back to 3.5mm headphones instead of Bluetooth headphones, I think it might have been a really good inclusion and maybe something that the competitors to this device might take as a point that Dell missed and they're going to pick up on. But I think what a lot of people want to know here is, in order to get to the price point of the XPS 13, what did Dell actually have to sacrifice? Because other than, you look at this thing and there's no sacrifices on the touch points, but internally, well, that is where things really get interesting versus the Neo. First of all, when it comes to battery capacity, well, Dell brought in their high-density battery design, which gives the XPS 13 a 53 watt-hour unit. Now, that's technically a whole lot more than the Neo, right? But you have to remember, Dell's using a repurposed hyper-efficient mobile chip, while Dell's using a purpose-built laptop processor that'll naturally consume more power. So I wouldn't be surprised to see both of these getting about the same amount of time away from a charger, but we'll just have to see about that once we review this thing in a couple of weeks or maybe closer to the end of June. In its base spec at least, Intel's new Wildcat Lake processor is being used with a Core i5-320 that has a pair of P-cores and 4 low-power efficient cores, along with just 2 Xe GPU cores. Basically, these processors, they use the exact same architecture as the latest Panther Lake processors, but they are cut down for efficiency and lower price points, and in some ways, they're cut down by a whole lot. That'll be paired up with either 8 or 16 gigs of single channel memory and 512 gigabytes of storage. Yes, there will be a 256 gigabyte option available a little bit later, but not right away at launch, and it's actually going to come in a little bit lower than the current base price. So basically, on the storage side at least, this is exactly the same as the upgraded $700 Neo. And no, there's just no good way to say this. On an Apple device with Mac OS, 8 gigabytes of memory, it's enough. We've shown that in our MacBook Neo content up to this point, even for multitasking. In the Windows environment though, that's a whole other ballgame. You could load up like a single tab in Chrome, and along with what's happening in the background in Windows, you're probably gonna be bashing right up to that 8 gigabyte mark. Not only that, we can't forget that Microsoft themselves has been telling us that 16 gigs is the sweet spot for Windows going forward. But anyways, look, we know that this is going to be a challenge going forward, and maybe Microsoft is gonna clean up the back end of their OS so it isn't so memory hungry. But at this point in time, there's some serious concerns about what seems like us going back in time to 8 gigabyte laptops. Anyways, another interesting addition here is biometrics through Windows Hello support, whereas you'll need to step up to the Neo's more expensive version for Touch ID. And the price for this, well, we all know what the Neo starts for. Students get it for $500 and everyone else, $600 in the US. And Dell got so close with their base spec, within $100, all while technically offering more features, biometric security, and more storage. But it is more expensive overall, and that might be a problem for some folks. And this thing will be weighted down by the whole inefficiency of Windows situation. Then again, upgrade that Neo to have the same level of storage as the XPS 13 along with Touch ID, and they've got identical prices. Meanwhile, in the near future, Dell will also be rolling out a more powerful XPS 13 with a Panther Lake Core Ultra processor that'll have up to 32 gigs of dual channel memory and a 1 terabyte SSD, which is the version I talked about earlier with a pair of Thunderbolt 4 ports. So in this quick preview, where does that leave us? Well, I think with the XPS 13, Dell, they put the writing on the wall, right? They're basically saying, you know, manufacturers think that people who don't have as much money to spend are just gonna make do with these cheap, crappy, e-waste worthy laptops. Well, that's gonna be a thing of the past. That's not good enough anymore. The MacBook Neo moved those goalposts into a completely different direction. And I'll be honest with you, right? If Dell and Apple can do this, you better bet that every other manufacturer that we've seen at this show that's saying for this level of everything, we need to be spending $1,000, $2,000. Well, that's just not gonna happen at this point in time. If they can do it, anybody can do it. And as a matter of fact, just as we went to record this video, we saw that Acer is coming out with a Swift Air that looks very much like the XPS 13. It's supposed to compete with the Neo, and it's another step in that right direction. The biggest question is, how do the Neo and XPS 13 actually compare? Well, you'll have to wait for a full review later in June to find out. But right now, this whole situation gives us a lot of hope for the future. Because remember, the current Neo isn't staying around for all that long. Rumor has it that Apple has basically run through of their A18 Pro inventory and will be transitioning to an upgraded Neo with the A19 series chip, along with potentially 12 gigs of memory. And the Windows laptop manufacturers, well, they have to be ready for that next nuke to drop, because everybody, like, competition is a good thing. You can point at Apple and look at all of their flaws and say Windows is the way to go. Maybe Linux is the way to go for you. But in the end, if consumers have a choice, and these things allow us to get more affordable laptops that are higher quality overall, well, everybody wins, right? So anyways, I'm Mike with Hardware Canucks. I hope that you enjoyed this preview of the XPS 13. We are so excited to review it. I actually might be taking this actual sample here and bring it back with me to Montreal from Taipei and using it as my daily driver and seeing how that 8 gigs of memory stacks up. I might want to throw it against the wall, or I might actually love it. Anyways, I'll let you guys know in the review. I'm Mike with Hardware Canucks, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a great day. Now, another thing I should mention is the fact that Dell has looked at the whole repairability angle too here, because in order to get into this laptop, we can't get into it ourselves here because this is a pre-production device, but there are only 4 hex screws, and then the whole bottom clamshell is supposed to pop open, giving you access to the internals and an upgradable SSD. So that is definitely a good point to take with this thing.